Well, today we welcome Kelly Bremner. Hi, Kelly. Kelly has lived in Emory with her two girls for the past 11 years. She is chair of the theater department at Emory and Henry College, and she is speaking to us today about re-emerging, something I'm nervous to do. I'm sure many of you are as well. Um, as we come out of sheltering in place for the year, we are re-emerging into a world that is in many ways very different. This talk will provide some reflection points for what this moment could mean for us as individuals and as a society. Take it away, Kelly.
Great, thanks, Amy. Yeah, I think a lot of us are really nervous about re-emerging, and that's part of what I'm going to talk about today. But I'll admit, I'm really looking forward to the conversation that we have after this to sort of share in some community, to think through together what re-emerging for us all might look like. For today's talk, I thought that I would sort of, get the ball rolling, sort of selfishly on this topic, which is really close to my mind and heart. And I imagine is close to a lot of folks' minds and hearts right now. All I've got for us today are maybe some points of reflection, some ideas and notions that I'm trying to work with to help find some meaning in this moment. So, if these provide some points of reflection for you, great. And as I said, I'm just really looking forward to the conversation afterwards to share with you all, where your minds and hearts are on this idea of reemerging. So as I said at the top of this, this morning I, sort of rallied my girls out of their pajamas into their, what we call in this house, quote, legitimate clothing, something that has, been fewer and far between this year of sheltering in place. And, I just wanted to make sure they felt comfortable, like with what the music was going to look like this morning. So we were singing on. And last night too, as I was putting together the screens to share for lyrics, I've tossed some extra things in about that song we just sang and started with that I'll hope to use to frame this conversation. So let's just start with the name of that little song, right? And let it kick us off as we start to reemerge together or think on reemerging. So my life flows on an endless song. How can I keep from singing? From those of you who know me pretty well in this crowd, I think, or I hope you've picked up on the fact that although I think I'm a realist, I'm also an eternal optimist. I often will joke about in various, committee assignments, department work, et cetera. Even in the darkest moments, I'll toss my voice in as the quote, Susie Sunshine of any group that I'm in, even when things are hard. And I don't think my optimism is naive, but I do think it's something else. I think it's optimism, but I think it's tempered. It's a tempered optimism. And I think that we all have this trait within us somewhere. But I don't know about you, but I have found that optimism, even that tempered optimism, a bit hard to hold on to these past 17 months. And as Amy just alluded to, despite the news of the recent weeks, I'm not finding it getting much easier. As the CDC starts to say, all right, y'all, masks off, and people start to go for it, I don't know about you, but I'm hesitant. More than that, I kind of can't yet. I can't do it. And some of them, I think those feelings that I have are science-based, right? So many people in our community are unvaccinated because they can't be, right? I live in a house with two children. One of them will not be able to be vaccinated for the foreseeable future. My 13-year-old obviously has access to vaccines now, but even still, we're at weeks until that vaccination takes hold, right? Some people choose not to be vaccinated, right? And then that presents us all with a sort of moral conundrum. If I'm aware that, their world is safer with me with a mask on, how do I navigate that? Even though I might have strong and do have strong feelings about people who choose not to vaccinate out of a sort of sense of callousness towards their fellow man. Also, as we alluded to a moment ago, Bunny, you talked about this in terms of availability of vaccines. I'm having a hard time celebrating this masks off because the pandemic is seriously not over, right? Literally, as we sit here this morning, half the world is in the absolute worst of it. And so it is hard for me to think about, sort of celebrating with my mask off when I know what COVID-19 looks like in places other than here. I know what it looked like for us a few months ago. And what does the unmasking mean for the overburdening of our healthcare system? I'm having trouble trusting folks that that's really okay. I think some of the hesitancy is also psychological. I'm starting to hear what people call post-pandemic anxiety as a named condition. Psychologists are talking about this as the accrued trauma of the past year that has many people literally afraid to leave their homes, right? And I don't know that I'm afraid to leave my home, but it is different than it was pre-pandemic. It is. And it's hard after a year of being told we need to shelter in place. Aside from those scientific reservations or moral reservations or psychological reservations, I think some of my hesitation is another thing altogether. And I think that thing, and this may sound paradoxical, but let me talk about it for a second. When I clear away all the clutter that is in my world right now and I get real quiet, I think my hesitancy is hope. And I think it's hope coupled with fear that if we're not super careful, that we might squander this moment. You see, when so many people are talking about their hope that we can soon return to normal, I'd like to share another perspective, perhaps one that is even less popular. I'm terrified that we will return to normal. Pre-pandemic normal was not always a good thing. The cult of being busy and overworked, that increasingly neoliberal sense of productivity, of being the sole marker of our usefulness or our value as humans. You saw it in work culture as employers ask more and more of their people, and you see it in the cultures of home, the so-called mommy wars as parents try to have it all and try to have it all worthy of Pinterest. How organic can you be? How free range can you be? How homemade can you be? How local can you be? How high achieving can you be? How much can you KonMari with bonus points awarded if you can also post these things on social media? Even if this productivity kills us or robs us of our most precious commodity that we have as a family, that being the preciousness of quality time. We see it in the lives of our children. How high can we get their test scores? Which summer school can they get in? Which summer camp can they get in? Which after school activity can we get them involved in? We see the mommy wars and the cults of the busy combine in the worlds of our smallest citizens. The pre-pandemic world highlighted some of our divisiveness as people, injustices, especially those based in racism, so deeply rooted in the fabric of our society. Pre-pandemic, that ugly head of populism was rising globally, and it continues to rise all over the globe. Hatefulness laid bare and out in the open, but also thinly veiled by many of us who can't see our own blind spots. And so y'all, I'm just gonna say it, I am terrified of returning to normal. I am old enough to know how hard it is to change, and especially how hard it is and complex it is to change big, which is why this moment feels so significant to me. I don't know that we're really ready to reemerge. I don't know if we're really ready to take advantage of the pause button that we just hit and do the work of change that we really need to. I don't know if we have learned our lessons or if we ever will. When I last spoke to you about the wisdom of women, the last time I spoke to you, I was speaking about the wisdom of women. And I told you one theory coming from the pagan world is that the pandemic was this, that she was our mother, that she was sending us home to take a nap because we needed one badly. And like an exhausted toddler, we would wake up feeling better. And as horrifying as this pandemic has been, as blown away as I am by the incredible and deeply inequitable loss of life, the economic devastation, and the setbacks we all face, there is an opportunity in this moment. And I don't want to waste it. And I don't know how not to waste it. After a year or more in which everything was paused, and how rare these kinds of pauses are, we have the opportunity to turn the page on many of the unsavourable things about our old normal and start again, to start fresh. And we must not squander that chance to reemerge. I love Bertice Berry. I don't know if any of you listen to her, but I love her. And one thing she says about change is this. She says, I learned long ago that when change comes, you gotta slow down and take note of it. In the midst of that change is all possibility in the world. I feel that significance that she's talking about. I feel that possibility. Can't you? I sense it, but I know that it's not a promise. And I know that we all need to slow down for a second and see what's possible. And I can't help, here's my Susie Sunshine, to imagine the collective power of that dream of possibility. After all, how can I keep from singing? Do you know that that song we started with today has become the unofficial battle cry of the choral world in the pandemic? Maybe some of you know that. Some of you may have heard Eugene singing at the Moonlight, right? He titled his concert this song. There's a real reason why he did that. There's a reason why my girls know this song. They sang it with Jane Morrison through the Mecca choirs, because it's become this unofficial battle cry of the music world in the face of the pandemic. How can I keep from singing, right? Remember at the beginning of the pandemic, when all of the tales came out as choirs as like the most dangerous thing that you could do, right? This pandemic made music the most dangerous thing to do. Well, the world adapted quickly and they found safe ways to sing, right? I safely just sang to you. And this song became their way to speak about what I'm saying here today. They're saying that through it all, there is a song on the wind that sings of possibility. Let me read these lyrics to you. And I was typing out these lyrics last night. I was like, whoa, the words of this song are so important to this moment, right? So my life flows on in endless song above earth's lamentations, right? And then here's the one that really sings to me today. I hear the real, though far off hymn that hails a new creation, right? Through all of this pain and all of this death and suffering, there's still a hymn on the wind that's talking to us about something new. If only we dare not to return to normal, but to reemerge in a new, I guess, normal. As I was preparing for this talk, I was talking to my partner, West, who's here today. Hi. They are writing a column for a newsletter for a local business on a similar theme. And they and I started to talk about cicadas. Can you imagine? And maybe I'm the only person who ever does things like this, but can you imagine if you were a cicada, or that if we operated like cicadas, and that we just came out every 17 years, right? How different my world was 17 years ago, right? But let's think smaller for a second. Let's just think 17 months. 17 months. 17 months ago from this exact moment, right? So we're channeling the cicada, was December 16th, 2019. Do you remember what life was like in December of 2019? That was a mere 17 months ago. Cicadas are pretty impressive when you think about it. I've always found them to be just magical creatures, kind of gross, but also kind of magical. How do they know, right? I think it's so interesting to listen to scientists talk about this, but I think there's something else going on there too, something big, something universal. But they know exactly when to reemerge, and they do not squander that moment, right? They climb up into the trees and they start screaming their heads off. Maybe this moment could be a little bit of that for us too. Maybe this talk could be the beginning of my own moment of climbing up into the trees like a cicada and trying to understand and know the impact of my screaming. And I think I understand that the reason why the scream of the cicada is so powerful is that they scream in community. Do you know that there's a group of moms who in the pandemic started to get together in a New Jersey park daily? They come together, masked and distant. They stay, 6 feet apart, and they take a deep breath and they collectively scream together. That's all they do. Those of you who are parents in the room, you're like, yeah, we need a Washington County, collective parenting scream session. That's all they do. They just scream together and then they go about their ways. They push their, strollers away from that space. And I feel like there's something to that, right? The collective power of screaming together once every 17 years, or maybe once in the 17 months. I think that that's what I felt when I heard the collective power of screaming in its own way this summer, as so many people took to the streets to talk about racial justice for the first time in the way in which it happened. I think that's what it is. And I hope that in some ways, maybe we can think about what it would mean to reemerge and make a lot of noise when that moment happens, about what we want to happen. Thinking also about reemerging and cues from Mother Nature. Last summer, as in every summer, I think many of you know that I work at a pediatric oncology summer camp. And last year, it was entirely virtual. One of the many reasons I feel so strongly about vaccinations is when you work with a community that is full of children who cannot be vaccinated, or for whom their chemotherapies that saved their life removed all immunities to common diseases. I really start to feel that collective responsibility. This is a very medically fragile community, and thus, as I think you all would understand, any kind of in-person summer camp there was just no way to keep them safe, and there's no way to keep them safe this coming summer either. So it'll once again be an all virtual experience. But last summer, I was given the job of working with the oldest campers in their Leader in Training program. So these are essentially like graduating seniors. It's sort of weird because I also run the first year seminar at Emory and Henry College. And so I had to be like, these are not my students, these are my campers, right? It's a different kind of thing, but exactly the same age group. And this LIT year for them, for these kids, is one of the most important and significant moments of their lives. They dream of their LIT year, their whole lives. And in the face, many of them have literally survived cancer, right? And lived in some ways to get to this moment of their LIT year. And so when it was pushed onto Zoom, that became a pretty big challenge. And my co-leader and I decided pretty early on, we would just make it a crazy good week, right? It was going to be insanely awesome, despite the fact that it was on Zoom. And we really early on, she and I, again, summer camp, so everything's a little weird and a little crazy. We settled in on this idea of a metamorphosis, which is another idea of reemerging. And we decided that that was our theme, right? That we were a metamorphosis, that they were starting our LIT program as campers, but they were exiting that program as leaders of the summer camp, leaders of their community, leaders of their country, leaders of the world. These kids are really, really something. And what we did is we found joyfully as many opportunities as we could to like literally flap our wings, right? We made it silly as like moments that we called our butterfly moments as we felt ourselves growing and changing. So if you hung out around young people right now, when they hear something that they really resonate with, I don't know if you've ever heard them snap, right? That's sort of like their way of being like, yes, yes, more of that. We turned our snaps into butterfly wings when we could feel ourselves growing and changing. We all donned the most absurd butterfly headdresses as they graduated in lieu of graduation caps, just to drive that message home, right? Metamorphosis. And we laughed. We laughed so hard that week, even as we grew and even as we changed. And this idea of butterflies and a metamorphosis, even with all the guys in the room for whom, butterflies, we just went with it. And it was a magical week because of the way we embraced that theme. But it clearly got under my skin because as I walked away from that week, I started to notice how many times I saw images of butterflies. At first, it became for me kind of a game in order to sort of help my campers transition out of what was a really emotionally intense week. I started just to take photos of every time I saw a butterfly, and we had a group thread on our phones, and I would just take a photo and I would send it to them. But it very quickly became completely overwhelming. Have you all ever noticed how many times you see the image of a butterfly in a day? Well, I suddenly did. I saw butterflies everywhere. I saw them on children's shirts when I went to the stores. I saw them logos for businesses that have, in my mind, nothing to do with butterflies. I saw in the drawings of children around me, my daughters. I saw them on the milkweed in my garden. I saw moths that I wasn't sure if they were moths or butterflies. It didn't matter, right? The lesson was still the same. I saw moths and butterflies in their moments of metamorphosis everywhere. And then I got the most amazing butterfly sign at the beginning of this year when Reverend Bowers at the college, I don't know if any of you have had the opportunity to meet her yet, but she is extraordinary. And she opened up the college calling for us to make our year a quote butterfly moment, using the exact same language I had used with my young people this summer. This was our butterfly moment to metamorphosize into something better. She was talking specifically about the issue of racial justice, right? A way to reemerge as a college, as a beacon of racial justice in this region. But in any case, there it was again, this idea of a metamorphosis, right? Which takes some time. She called for us to metamorphosize into something better as a college, as teachers, as learners alongside of our students. And so I made the conscious choice to see all those butterflies in my world as a universal reminder and not to squander this unique and terrible moment. I have a mantra that I live by, which is I will not endure my life. I will not will time to move faster, right? I will not do it because I only get this, at least in this consciousness, this one round to work through it. So as challenging as the pandemic was, I felt called to make meaning out of it. And so this idea of metamorphosis became for me sort of a moral obligation not to squander it, not to squander being stuck at home, not to squander, lost time. And we've lost a lot. I have a young daughter who will graduate from elementary school this year who can't play on a playground, has not been able to play on a playground all year. She's a fifth grader. There is so much to mourn, but I won't let it just be that, right? At some point I said, I'm going to challenge myself to metamorphosize and reemerge from whatever this COVID-19 chapter is of my life. I'm going to reemerge as a dang butterfly, right? I'm going to do it. I don't know exactly what it means, but I'm going to do it. And so maybe as I start to wrap up my remarks this morning, maybe I'd like to ask you for something, leave you with a challenge or maybe even a bit of a request. As you start to navigate this moment of reemerging, I guess I'm going to ask you to look for butterflies with me. And I want you to think maybe every time that you see one, and you're going to see them now that I say it, you're going to see them everywhere. Children's clothing is loaded with butterflies. So if you go out in public and you see kids, you're going to see them everywhere, but it's not just there. They are everywhere. Every time you see one, remind yourself of the hope that's teeming from this once in a lifetime moment to shift. I'm going to ask that when you hear the cicadas screaming this summer, right? Because we're going to hear them after their 17 years of looking, after their 17 years of sleeping, let it be a reminder of this moment of our 17 months as it were, right? Let that scream become maybe a call for you to amplify what's important to you, maybe to find a way to look for someone else and amplify their scream, to amplify what's important to them. It's also not lost on me that if I understand correctly, what cicadas are screaming about is that they're looking for love. I mean, they're looking for love, right? So I invite you to hear that scream um, in that way. I think that this pandemic has forced us, for better or for worse, to pause and to really look around. This is our Rip Van Winkle moment, as it were, and it's getting time for us to reemerge, whether I like it or not. The question I'm asking myself then is, how do we reemerge compassionately? How do we reemerge with care and concern? We have a real chance here to reemerge as something, if only we choose to have the courage to change.